I was the bride that night, standing in lace and satin, when my new mother-in-law set down the cake knife and said for everyone to hear, "You'll always be second best in this family." The vineyard lights flickered across shocked faces, waiting for me to wilt. I didn't. I fixed my veil, let the silence stretch, and said, "Second best to you, maybe, but you have no idea what my mother left me or how it will change everything you think you control." Gasps rippled through the tables. They believed I was just the quiet nurse Daniel married. They were wrong, because tucked away in my bouquet was proof that would flip the entire Spencer family on its head. My name is Claire Morgan. I'm 29, a nurse in Portland, Oregon. Most nights I move under fluorescent lights, my shoes squeaking on linoleum, my mind too tired to think about anything but the next patient. Debt follows me everywhere. Student loans, car repairs, a credit card I keep promising to pay off. Daniel, my husband, came from another world. The Spencers owned vineyards across the Willamette Valley, their names stitched into wine labels and charity galas. When I first visited their estate, the air smelled like oak and money. Portraits of ancestors stared down at me as if they were deciding whether I belonged. His mother, Margaret, smiled politely, but her eyes skimmed over me like I was furniture. "Daniel's nurse," she said to every guest, "never Claire." She compared me to Olivia Whitmore, the banker's daughter Daniel once dated, educated, poised, rich. At dinners, she'd swirl her wine and ask, "Have you heard from Olivia lately?" Daniel would clear his throat. I would sit quiet, pretending not to feel the sting. It wasn't the first time I'd been invisible. Growing up, I had an older brother who got everything new while I got the leftovers. When he brought home a C, my parents said, "He's trying." When I got straight A's, they said, "That's expected." Once they forgot me at soccer practice. Sitting alone on the cold bleachers, I learned early what it meant to be second. Only my mother saw me. She worked long hours at a diner smelling of coffee and fries, but she always had time to sit beside me. One winter night, she handed me a small wooden music box carved with flowers. When someone tries to make you feel small, she whispered, "Remember what's inside this. Someday, it'll protect you." I didn't understand then. I do now. Years later in the ER, Daniel rushed in with a coworker who had collapsed. Afterward, he insisted on buying me coffee. He asked about my life like he truly wanted to know. That night, for the first time in years, I felt seen. When he proposed, I thought love would bridge the gap between us. It didn't. At our engagement dinner, Margaret raised her glass not to us, but to the Spencer legacy. She seated Olivia next to Daniel, laughing at all his jokes. I focused on the food, pretending the roasted salmon and lemon risotto didn't taste like ash. Wedding planning became another reminder of where I stood. The Spencers chose the vineyard, the string quartet, the caterer. They left me the crumbs, napkin colors, shoe choices. When I suggested a photographer I liked, Margaret said, "He's not timeless enough for our family." She even pushed a prenup across the table, calling it a formality. Daniel said we didn't need it, but I saw hesitation flicker behind his eyes. Meanwhile, I worked double shifts to pay for my share. I found my dress on clearance, altered it myself at midnight, skipping lunch to save for flowers. They called it the family fund when they paid for everything on their side, but that door never opened for me. At Thanksgiving, Margaret carved the turkey while telling everyone how Olivia's thriving, she's glowing. Guests smiled awkwardly. Daniel squeezed my hand under the table, but nothing could quiet the sound of her voice, drowning out mine. Whenever I felt erased, I'd touch the music box hidden in my nightstand, tracing the carved petals. Sometimes I'd wind it just to hear the melody soft and haunting, like my mother reminding me, "Don't let them write you out of your own story." One night, as we finalized the wedding menu, I overheard Margaret on the phone in the kitchen. Olivia was always the one. "This girl, she's temporary, second best." Then she laughed, brittle and mean. I stood in the dark hallway, my hands gripping the railing. For a moment, I wanted to run, leave the house, the family, all of it. But something hardened in me instead. I whispered to myself, "Not this time." That night, I opened the music box for the first time since my mother's funeral. The melody played 3 trembling notes before the lid creaked shut again. I wasn't ready then, but I would be. The weeks before the wedding blurred into exhaustion. Every morning began with hospital corridors and ended with messages from Margaret about family expectations. At the engagement party, she turned humiliation into theater. She invited Olivia Daniels' ex, calling it a friendly gesture. She placed her beside Daniel at the family table while I sat at the far end, next to strangers. Every toast circled back to the Spencer legacy. Daniel's hand found my knee under the table, but when I looked up, Margaret's smile told me she knew I wouldn't fight back. The bridal shower was no better. The room smelled of peonies and champagne. Laughter bubbled around me. Everyone brought extravagant gifts, monogram towels, crystal frames until Margaret's turn. She handed me a small box. Inside was a plain white apron embroidered with "Practice makes perfect." The room laughed politely. I smiled too, swallowing the humiliation like wine turned sour. That night, I folded the apron neatly, buried it under sweaters, and stared at the stitched word until it blurred. I started saving everything, screenshots of messages, receipts for every expense. I covered emails where Margaret signed off decisions as if I didn't exist. At work, I charted vitals and whispered to myself, "Stay calm, observe, wait." Then came the rehearsal dinner. The vineyard glowed under strings of amber light. Guests filled long tables draped in ivory linen. I sat beside Daniel, pretending to belong. Margaret, radiant in silver, commanded the room. And then Olivia appeared. Pale silk dress, familiar laughter. Guests whispered her name like a hymn. "Olivia, darling, sit here," Margaret said, patting the seat beside her. Daniel froze but didn't stop it. My chest tightened. The world tilted just slightly. During dinner, Margaret's voice carried above the chatter. She praised Olivia's speeches, her charity work, her grace. My fork scraped porcelain. I didn't trust myself to speak. The slideshow began photos of Daniel's childhood vacations, graduations. Then it froze. A picture of Daniel and Olivia at a winter ball, her hand looped through his arm. The laughter around us turned sharp. Margaret clapped softly. Oh, what a memory. Heat climbed up my neck. I pushed my chair back, excused myself, and stepped onto the patio. The cold air slapped my cheeks. Inside, laughter swelled again. I opened my clutch and held the music box, its carved flowers catching the moonlight. I didn't open it, I just needed to feel it. The door opened behind me. Ethan, Daniel's cousin, stepped out. His expression was steady, serious. "You don't deserve this," he said quietly. I turned wary. "What are you talking about?" He hesitated, then lowered his voice. "I've overheard things, your mother-in-law's plans. You need to see something. After the wedding." I studied his face. No pity, no superiority, just truth. "Why tell me?" "Because I'm tired of pretending this family is what it claims to be." Inside, I heard Margaret's laughter again, smooth and poisonous. I closed my fist around the music box until the carved petals left marks in my palm. That night, lying awake beside Daniel, I replayed everything: the apron, the slideshow, the laughter. A pattern carved itself. Clear, erase me, replace me, repeat. But as the ceiling glowed faintly from the moonlight, the melody from the music box echoed in my head. My mother's voice threaded through it. "When someone tries to make you feel small, remember what's inside." I didn't know what waited beneath that velvet lining, but I knew one thing. I was done being small. The wedding day broke gray and cold fog rolling over the Willamette Hills. From the dressing room window, I could see rows of vines glistening with dew, perfect and controlled like everything Margaret touched. I slipped into my satin gown, adjusted my veil, and tucked the music box deep into my bouquet. Its weight was small but steady, like armor. By evening, the hall shimmered with light. Guests clinked glasses, laughter rising under the vaulted ceiling. Margaret floated from table to table in a jeweled dress, glowing with satisfaction. Daniel smiled at me, but his eyes darted constantly toward her. When the cake was wheeled in, the chatter hushed. Margaret walked forward, one hand on the knife, and in a voice meant to reach every corner, said, "You'll always be second best in this family." A collective gasp cut through the music. Forks froze midair. I met her gaze, my pulse strangely calm. "Second best to you," maybe I said. "But you have no idea what my mother left me or how it will change everything." Murmurs spread. Daniel blinked, stunned. Margaret's smile faltered. I turned and walked out, bouquet in hand, through the hall of whispering guests. In the bridal suite, I set the bouquet down and opened the music box. Inside lay my mother's folded letter and an iron key taped underneath. Her familiar handwriting steadied me. "If you're reading this, you're facing people who would rather erase you. Remember, your place here was paid for long before they decided you didn't belong." Attached was documentation of her investment in the vineyard made years ago with Daniel's late father, proof that I owned part of what they called their legacy. When I returned, Ethan was waiting near the projector. Our eyes met. He gave a small nod. The lights dimmed. The slideshow flickered, then changed. A recording played Margaret's voice, crisp and undeniable. She'll never be one of us. The prenup will cut her out. Olivia was always the right choice. Gasps swept the room. Daniel's jaw tightened. Margaret stood frozen color draining from her face. That was taken out of context, she stammered. No, Ethan said evenly. That's exactly what you said. I lifted the music box, the letter visible in my other hand. My mother saw through this long before I did, I said. She left me her shares in this vineyard. I'm not second best. I'm part of this place, whether you like it or not. The hall erupted, half shock, half disbelief. Margaret tried to speak, but her own voice still echoed from the speakers, shredding her poise. Daniel looked between us, realization dawning. I stepped down from the platform, my bouquet brushing against my dress. This story, I whispered to myself, isn't yours to write anymore. And for the first time that night, the silence that followed felt like freedom. The next morning, the vineyard was still. The only sound was rain tapping against the glass, washing the glitter and gossip away. Daniel slept beside me, but I couldn't. I sat on the edge of the bed, the music box in my lap, my mother's words looping in my head. You are not small. By noon, I was driving back to Portland, the fog curling low across the highway. I stopped at the downtown bank, handed the iron key to a clerk, and followed him into the safety deposit vault. Inside the box were neatly stacked papers, ownership documents, signed contracts, proof my mother had invested in the Spencer Vineyard decades ago. Her handwriting covered the margins, clear and deliberate. That afternoon, I met with a lawyer. She skimmed the pages, then looked at me. These are legitimate, she said. They give you legal stake and leverage. For the first time, I exhaled without shaking. Within a week, I moved out of the Spencer estate and into a tiny apartment above a cafe downtown. It smelled of espresso and rain, and it was entirely mine. The music box sat on the nightstand, the melody softening the hum of the city outside. Then came Margaret's retaliation voicemails laced with faux concern, long emails dripping with guilt. You're tearing this family apart, she wrote. Daniel doesn't deserve this embarrassment. I forwarded them all to my lawyer. Soon, news traveled faster than she could contain it. The board at her charity heard the recording from the wedding. Sponsors began pulling back. Margaret Spencer, the matriarch who demanded perfection, was suddenly a scandal. Daniel showed up at my door one rainy evening, shoulders hunched, tie loosened. I didn't know, he said quietly. Not about the prenup, not about Olivia. I should have stopped her. I nodded steady. You knew enough to stay silent. He didn't argue. I'll fix it. I'll cut her off if that's what it takes. I met his eyes. Then start by standing on your own name, not hers. Ethan texted me updates in the following weeks, Margaret resigning from her charity, losing her seat on the board, relatives distancing themselves. The Spencer's polished image cracked wide open. Through it all, I kept working. My night shifts grounded me. Holding a patient's hand, watching a monitor beep, reminded me what real life looked like: messy, fragile, honest. Every now and then, gossip about me reached the hospital. Gold digger, schemer, liar, I didn't respond. My lawyer's firm sent letters when needed, and silence took care of the rest. By early spring, Daniel moved into a small rental near my place. He sent me scanned documents showing he'd revoked his mother's control over his finances. It wasn't an apology, it was a beginning. One weekend, I drove out to the Ballard property, the little house my mother had bought years before. The paint was chipped, the garden overgrown, but sunlight poured through the windows like forgiveness. I wound the music box and set it on the mantel. Its melody echoed through the empty rooms, delicate but unwavering. I hung a spare key on a hook by the door. For the first time in years, the space around me felt light, unclaimed, and finally mine. Spring arrived gently in Portland. The air smelled like wet grass and coffee, and sunlight slipped through my kitchen window every morning. I'd wake early, pour a mug, and listen to the city come alive below my small apartment. The chaos was still there, Bill's work memories, but the noise inside me had quieted. The Ballard house was finished by then. I repainted the walls myself, planted lavender in front, and let the wind carry the scent through open windows. No vineyard, no portraits, no scrutiny, just space that finally belonged to me. One Saturday, Daniel came by with an envelope. He looked older, humbled. Inside were signed documents, proof he had severed every financial tie to Margaret and dissolved the trust she'd built around him. "I don't know if we can fix us," I said softly. He shook his head. "Maybe not, but you showed me what standing up looks like." I had to start somewhere. I poured us coffee. We sat in silence, not as enemies, not quite as lovers, just two people letting go. That evening I opened the music box again. The familiar tune filled the room, but it sounded different, no longer a reminder of pain, but of strength. I slipped a folded note inside, written in my own hand. "Don't let anyone tell you you're small. Don't let them make you second best. Walk away if you must. You'll be fine." I closed the lid, let the melody play, and watched the last light fade across the wooden floor. For years I thought family meant belonging. Now I know it means respect. And when that's gone, you have every right to leave. So if you've ever been told you don't belong in your own story, ask yourself, would you stay quiet or would you stand and walk your own road? If this story hit close to home, share your thoughts below. Have you ever had to walk away from your own family to protect your peace? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay for more family revenge stories that prove silence can be the sharpest answer.